In this section, our goal is to be able to use the graphing calculator as a tool for solving quadratics, factoring, and confirming factors. Recall that x-intercept, 0, root, and solution all mean the same thing, where the graph crosses or touches the x-axis. So given a coordinate plane, there's the x and y axes, and a graph of a quadratic function, the solutions would be here and here. This graph has 2 zeros, 2 solutions, 2 roots, 2 x-intercepts. Remember that recently we've been finding solutions of quadratics by first finding the factors. When the quadratic was set equal to 0, and then using the zero product property. Let's talk about some relationships between factors and solutions and different methods for finding both. Examples. Number 1, what are the factors of this quadratic, x squared minus 4x plus 3? So recently we've factored a trinomial by knowing that if it factors, it will make 2 binomials. No matter how you choose to do this, if this is x squared, we will get x times x for the first terms in each binomial. Then, the last terms, we think what multiplies to make 3, like 1 times 3 or negative 1 times negative 3, but adds up to make negative 4. So this pair does that because negative 1 plus negative 3 is negative 4. So our factors are x minus 1 and x minus 3, and those are our factors. Now, using the calculator, we take our quadratic, x squared minus 4x plus 3, and we treat it like it's part of an equation. So the quadratic and say equal to 0. And then we go to the graphing calculator and use the application number 4, polysimul 2. So apps, fourth option, 4, fourth option, and then press any key. And then the first option, the root finder, we're finding roots, so the root finder. And then make sure these parts are highlighted. The order is 2, real numbers, and fractions is usually what we have to focus on the most, and then we can press next. Now we'll type in the coefficients and the constant that appear when our quadratic is in standard form. So this quadratic we know starts with 1 x squared, so we'll type 1. And then the x coefficient is negative 4. And finally, the constant is 3. And now we will solve. There are the solutions, x equals 3 and x equals 1. Let's jot those down. But remember that our goal was to find the factors of this quadratic. Well, remember that if we had the quadratic equation x squared minus 4x plus 3 equals 0, and we factored x minus 1 times x minus 3 equals 0, we would then set each of these factors equal to 0 and solve for x. So x equals 1 and x equals 3. Notice that when x equals 1, x minus 1 is the factor. When x equals 3, x minus 3 is the factor. So that's what we have to do when we start with the solutions or the zeros. We have to think backwards. So if x equals 1, remember that when we did it this way, it was from the zero product property. So we needed the equation to equal 0. How do we turn the 1 into a 0? We have to subtract 1 from it, and we do that on both sides of the equation. So we have x minus 1 equals 1 minus 1 makes 0. So once we have it equal to 0, we see that that's our factor, x minus 1. And then when x equals 3, similarly, to make that a 0, we have to subtract 3 from both sides. So we have x minus 3 equals 0, and x minus 3 is the factor. Put those two factors together, x minus 1 times x minus 3 is the factored form of the trinomial. See how everything connects? So what if we were asked, find the solutions of the equation x squared minus 4x plus 3 equals 0. So in number 1, we were asked for the factors. And what we got were x minus 1 and x minus 3. This is the same quadratic, but notice that it's an equation. It says equals 0. So we could start with the factors, x minus 1 times x minus 3 equals 0, and ultimately do what we did above, which is set each equal to 0, each factor, and solve for x. And that gave us x equals 1 and x equals 3. Those were our solutions. Remember, another way to write solutions is in a set, like 1, 3 with the squiggly brackets. What are the zeros of the function f of x equals x squared minus 4x plus 3? Well, again, this is the same quadratic, so it's basically asking for the same thing, and we know that zeros mean the same thing as solutions. So however it asks, we mean to find those same x-intercepts, x equals 1 and x equals 3. If we graph this quadratic, which we can also do with the calculator, y equals, pressing y equals, we type x squared minus 4x plus 3. Remember that f of x is just another way to say y. So x squared minus 4x plus 3. Taking a look at our graph, we see the graph crossing through the x-axis at positive 1 and positive 3, just like is shown in our picture here. So looking at the graph is another way to see that x equals 1 and x equals 3 are the zeros or solutions of the function or the quadratic equation. Let's take a look at more examples. Number 1, what are the zeros of the function f of x equals x squared minus 5x minus 6? So again, remember f of x is another way to say y. So what we could do is go to our calculator in y equals and type that in. X squared minus 5x minus 6. And then take a look at the graph and see where our graph crosses the x-axis. We don't have to see the whole parabola for this, just the x-intercepts. So here's a picture of it here and here. That looks like negative 1, x equals negative 1, and x equals 6. So taking those x-intercepts, same as zeros, we can write x equals negative 1 and x equals 6. What are the factors of the function? So notice, same quadratic. If I start with the 0, I want to make it equal 0. So how do I make a negative 1 equal 0? I add 1 to both sides. So x plus 1 equals 0, and therefore x plus 1 is a factor. Similarly, x equals 6, the other 0, I need to make the 6 into a 0, minus 6, and therefore x minus 6 equals 0, and the factor is x minus 6. And those are the factors of the function f of x equals x squared minus 5x minus 6. So looking at the graph or using the app will help us find factors, solutions, zeros, roots, x-intercepts. Number 2, solve the equation 4n squared minus 9 equals 0. So because this is equal to 0, we could use the quadratic app or graph it. We could think of this as 4x squared minus 9 equals 0. And let's go to the calculator and practice again how the zeros will help us solve this. So apps, fourth choice, root finder, because root are solutions. Next, the x squared coefficient is 4. I don't have any x, so this is like 4x squared plus 0x minus 9. So 0 comes next, and then negative 9. Let's solve that, and we have x equals 3 halves and x equals negative 3 halves. Those are the solutions to the equation. What are the factors of this expression? So I see this is the same quadratic. Let's take each of the solutions, x equals 3 halves and x equals negative 3 halves. So again, remember that our goal is to make this equal 0. But it's not pleasant to have to work with fractions if we don't need to, so maybe we deal with that first. If this says divided by 2, and I don't want to have the divided by 2 there, the inverse operation of divided by 2 is multiply by 2. So let's do that on both sides of this equation. Get rid of that denominator. 2 times x is 2x equals 3. Ah, that's better. Now let's make this to 0 by subtracting 3 from both sides. Now these are not like terms, so I'll write 2x minus 3 equals 0. So therefore the factor is whatever is equal to 0, 2x minus 3. Similarly, in this one, I don't want the fraction, so let's do the inverse of dividing by 2, which is multiply by 2. That leaves us with 2x equals negative 3. How do I make negative 3 0? Add 3 to both sides. So 2x plus 3 equals 0, and therefore the factor is 2x plus 3. So what are the factors of this expression? 2x minus 3 and 2x plus 3. Number 3, what are the roots of the equation 4x squared plus 7x plus 3 equals 0? Let's go to the app or the graph to find those. From this screen, where we want to do it again, we want to type the coefficients. So let's choose this one to do it again. 4, 7, 3. 4, 7, 3. Solve it. And we have negative 1 and negative 3/4. Let's turn those in to the factors of the same expression that we had equal to 0. X equals negative 1 and x equals negative 3/4. Here we don't have a fraction, so this one's just add 1 to both sides. X plus 1 equals 0, so the factor is x plus 1. The other one, though, is a fraction. I don't want divided by 4, so multiply by 4 on both sides. 4x equals negative 3. Now I need it to equal 0, so add 3. 4x plus 3 equals 0. And because this is equal to 0, the factor is 4x plus 3. So what are the factors of the expression? X plus 1 and 4x plus 3. See how it's all related? Take a couple minutes to write a short summary and describe the relationship between zeros and factors. See you in class.